of Monash Malaysia R&D and also the Vice President of R&D at Monash University Malaysia. He is a Fellow of CPA Australia, a Fellow of the Academy of Science of Malaysia, and a Professor of Econometrics and Business Statistics at Monash University Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a big warm welcome to Professor Dr. Mahendran S. Nair, your moderator for our first panel session.
Tan Sri, Dato, distinguished speakers, panel members, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. This is an exciting forum. I'd really like to thank the organizers for inviting me to chair the session. We had an excellent two presentations this morning outlining the global landscape, what are the key challenges, both regionally and internationally, that's impacting the industry, pretty much all industries. And this morning, we've got three more speakers, very distinguished speakers. And then we've got our two speakers this morning in the panel session that we will then, probe some questions, key issues, challenges, what are the strategies that firms should put in place to navigate these headwinds that is ahead of us. How do we essentially leapfrog to a much higher level of sustainable development? So without further ado, let me invite the panel members. The first panel member is Tan Sri Lim Siye. I invite Chris. YB Nurul, Professor Munai and Professor Anil. Just to set the scene, I think this morning we've had fantastic discussions on mapping out the landscape, the changes that's happening in the landscape. I took a few notes down on some of the major global forces that were shaping the economies. And clearly, I think one of the key things that we are seeing is this whole notion of the Schumpeterian creative destruction that is being unraveled. And while there are challenges, there are also a lot of opportunities. And I think one of the key things that is discussed is converging technologies, issues related to social networks, the virtual world, essentially it's transforming how trade from merchandise to more service sector. We're starting to see global outsourcing, the fourth generation taking shape. A lot of discussion on talent, the different types of talent training, different models, and also a major challenge for many developing countries is talent poaching. How do you manage this issue of brain drain? Not just creating supply of talent, but also retaining them in the ecosystem. There are a lot of issues related to, I think, some issues of energy crisis, liberalization, discussion on where are we with respect to TPP and the whole range of opening up the markets. There's a lot of discussion on globalization and deglobalization. And is globalization transitioning to become globalization? The smaller players, the bigger players are changing, transforming. You've got new players from transforming the economies. We had the major giants, now you've got other players like Facebook and others transforming the landscape. Regional blocks, how do we look at regional blocks such as ASEAN and EU and with what's happening globally, and how is trading blocks transforming into trade barriers and some of the trade disputes. Massive technological diffusion that is happening across the globe. We're also starting to see new economic superpowers that are emerging, that opens up new opportunities, but there are also challenges that we will probe later on in some of the discussions. I think Professor Anil talked about the changing demographics. There's a lot of focus on intangible assets. Data is the new oil of the new economy. And also there are issues pertaining to national security as we become more and more digital. So with that, I think, with that scene setting that is done this morning, We've got three speakers today that's going to talk about how they see the global landscape from their perspectives. And we've got the first speaker today is Professor Tan Sri Lin Yan. Let me just say something about him. Professor Tan Sri Lin Yan was a banker for most of his professional life. He has he's a Harvard-educated economist and a British chartered scientist, holds a PhD in economics from Harvard. He was in central bank for 34 years. Probably will give perspective from a central banker and a more broader economist. He's worked under all the prime ministers, including the present prime minister, on 2 occasions. He's also served as an expert on many international organizations, IMF, World Bank, UN Commission on Sustainable Development. He's the president of the Harvard Club of Malaysia and an author of a well-known book, The Global Economy in Turbulent Times and Turbulent in Trying Times. So without further ado, I invite Professor Tan Sri Lin to start off the discussion today. You can stand at the podium if you want.
Yeah, maybe I missed that. Thank you. I'm just going to spend a few minutes just painting the broad brush, talking about the threats to the world economy, and then ending up with the message. The message is a very simple one. If you want to survive, you have to change. I just had a conversation with an old friend of mine, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning economist. And he told me that if you poll 10 persons and ask them whether they would change, 9 of them or 9.5 of them would say they would change. But in actual fact, none of them would change. So, although the message is very simple, change is difficult. And but change we must. So let me go on. We're living in the age of unprecedented risk. Business faces political upheaval. Politics grapples with disruption. Politics threatens to disturb foundations of the world order. Sounds familiar, our friend Trump, and confronts unprecedented business risk. And because of a lot of disruptive politics going on. These are unsettling times. Well, trade wars is one of them. We are used to it. And this is in the face of rising power of populism. What can China do next? I think China has already recognized the risk of a broader clash. But bear in mind that China has changed the world. And so has the world's view of China have also changed. China's rise has been on its own terms, with bumps and quills and occasional standout. But the West is distracted and at times amenable. I prefer to look at the monitor. Used to be a teacher, you know. But whether China likes it or not, China's feet are being held to the fire. And that's described in that very simple screen. First term. Related to this, I think this is significant. The Americans have refrained from naming China as a currency manipulator. And as you know, governments are normally very happy when foreigners buy their bonds, especially long-term holders like central banks. But America is different. It worries when central banks buy their debt and keep US dollar pricing. In fact, those of you who read this morning's newspaper by old examiner at Harvard, Janet Yellen, accuses the Fed of causing the rising trade deficit in America because of the strong dollar. Right? And this is coming, whether we like it or not. The world rose in sync over the last 10 years, and it will fall in sync in the next 2 years. As I said, it's almost inevitable. You can see it from the numbers. The latest numbers from China and the Eurozone. Factory readings are at a 2-year low. US is already peaking. Global growth wobbles have already hit the market in October. Inflation is slowly picking up on the back of populism, protectionism, and higher interest rates. So whether we like it or not, it's coming. I'll move on to a next trend, which most people would not regard as a trend. If you look at it from the time of after the war, that is from my generation, I think the latest generation is probably 4 generations ahead. You are talking of, at the moment, talking of the millennials and Gen Z. Gen Z, which is people born 1997, 96, 97, who are now beginning to come of age and coming into the workforce. They are called iGen simply because they grew up on the iPhone. And so the trend is not so much the millennials, because they are getting old by their standard, right? My grandchildren tells me that if you are 35, why are you so old? Yeah. So the trend really comes from Gen Z, and they are coming into the workforce whether we like it. This is the new driving force. The millennials and the Gen Z slickers share common common characteristics. Both are digital natives. They are online constantly, to the irritation of a lot of parents here. They are rooted in the internet and mobile. They communicate and buy online, but have great spending power. And that's their strength, and that's why people are interested. They grew up with the finance, huge numbers worldwide, but they're all skeptical of government, distrust organizing, and individuals. They are well educated, but not optimistic, especially those in the US and Europe. But Asians are different. Asian millennials are more secure, more optimistic, confident of living better lives than their parents, unlike many, many Americans. And they prefer to be cashless. Gen Z, this is just a picture. So in China alone, 250 million of this new generation will come into the workforce for some English. Now Gen Z is different. I think it's important to understand the new generation that is creeping up. They will transform. They are confident, they are independent, and they spend. They like to spend. But they are a scarred generation because They were born during the time of the last recession, cautious, hardened by economic and social factors. But unlike the millennials, they are more competitive and more work-focused, more eager to get rich, but also at the same time risk-averse, prefers freelancing, more adept with technology, highly digital. Unlike most people might not know this, they have a very strong work ethic. In fact, they love to work overtime. More anxious, reserved, but they lack social skills. They drive less, and according to a latest survey, they have less sex as well. So they grew up on a smartphone, not comfortable interacting one-to-one. So they socialize through texting and social media. They're less interested in owning their own business, like being cashless, and then moving on to the sidewalks. In fact, in Scandinavia today, most of them have implants. Whether it's passport or anything that will make them digital. So we are going to deal with a new generation of youngsters. And they are involved in disruptive technology. I just wanted to give you an idea of what disruptive technology means in practice, especially for your building. I gave the example of receptionists. It is disappearing. There will still be a receptionist, but no receptionist desk. We all know they have a watch, and everything is on facial recognition AI. So they will provide a hassle-free reception experience. Definitely towards delivering hospitality service in a corporate environment that is largely devoid of furniture and more of technology. And so buildings will begin to be designed differently. Finally, I want to talk about the deep democratic dips. There are three tendencies here. The first is fertility is low today. It is over the world, it is slowly creeping towards less than 2.1, and that is less than replacement rate. In the US is 1.76, in Germany is 1.5, in Spain is 1.33. 90% of the advanced countries have fertility rates below replacement. In China, it's well below 2.1. Even Malaysia is 1.9. It's scary. This simply means that you all know this. We grow because of two factors: population growth or productivity. We don't have population growth to depend on anymore. So it has to be productivity, and hence technology. Second, population already begin to decline. Germany, certainly Japan. The Japanese population is beginning to shrink. By 2065, it will fall by 28 million. So the Japanese story is clear, but Germany is next, and Europe is following up far behind. And finally, the rise of old people like myself, over 65. You can see the lines moving up, starting with Germany and Japan. And by 2040, 1 in 3 is over 65. It's scary. Thailand is, in ASEAN, Thailand is aging the fastest, followed by Malaysia. This implies falling GDPs, fewer schools, fewer houses to be built, and the emergence of elder care facilities. I just came back from Harvard after spending a while there, talking to the School of Public Health. They are so concerned with elder care now, they have recruited the world's best architect on designs for elder care. And that's where we are going. So if I'm to summarize, the key determinants of our outlook over the next 2 years. Unpredictability of policies, especially in America. This is the power of rising populism and nationalism. As I said, the world will slow down in sync in the next 2 years. And this, to some extent, reflects constricting chaos regulation. I mentioned that high-gen power, they will be not only transforming, they will be transformative. Disruption, technology disruption. And I refer here in particular to Trump's elastic use of the definition of national security. When he feels like it, he just uses national security to regulate whatever he wants. And finally, and this is going to have the most impact on your industry. Less kids, more elderly. This will drive productivity, and unless and until we can get productivity up, we will have no growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. You talked about the retirement age in Malaysia. I think we've got to move it now to 95, led by the Prime Minister. Thank you. Let's move on to the next speaker. We've got Chris Divench, who's going to speak on industry perspective for some of the key challenges and opportunities. Little bit of Chris. Chris works in the financial advisory practice in Southeast Asia, specializing in corporate strategy and mergers and acquisition. He brings to him 20 years of experience in growth strategy, M&A, turnaround, and operational excellence, focused on providing advisory services to corporates, financial institutions, and government. He has worked in both strategy houses and the Big Four, and has been in Southeast Asia for 15 years. So, can I invite Chris to present his? I think the clicker is.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and first of all, a big thank you to the organisers for inviting me here. It's truly an honour. I've been in Asia now for 16 years. I thought I'd be here for 3, and probably end up retiring here, which I think spells the words growth and opportunity. And I think we're at the cusp of seeing wonderful opportunities in front of us. But I think the theme of my talk is going to be around where are those opportunities, and what do we really need to do to capture them moving forward. Clearly what we've done in the last 50 years is no longer going to be applicable in the next 5, 10, 15 and 20. And we've had some fantastic presentations this morning which are really talking about some of those opportunities and challenges that we're faced with. So I'll probably gloss over 1 or 2 of my slides that we're going into right now, and again try and focus on specifically where are the opportunities in Asia, where are they in the value chain, and what do we need to do to try and capture those opportunities. And I promise I'll keep it to within 10 minutes. So first of all, as an advisor, when I look at an industry, the first thing I do is I look at its value chain. And it tells me everything I need to know about where the opportunities lie. In this case, construction is obviously a very old industry. You saw in the European index, it's probably one of the least digitized to date. So when I see this, it says to me, there are opportunities to make it more efficient and more effective. It's old, it's traditional, it hasn't historically been particularly innovative. I remember doing a piece of advisory work for a client in Germany who come up with a new type of cement, which had great properties, but trying to bring this into the industry, which is a very conservative one, was going to be a real long haul and difficult task. I think moving forward, again, that means to me that there's real opportunity and technology and the ability to digitize this industry and bring innovation across that whole value chain and in materials moving forward spells great opportunity. So looking at the industry itself from a global perspective, the only line to really look at here is that there's really continued robust growth moving forward. And if we talk about Asia as a region, without a doubt, infrastructure and construction, I think we have another boom time ahead of us for at least 30 years, if not 50. And Asia is really the area, I believe, that is going to be driving that growth moving forward. Another good indicator for the construction industry is obviously take a look at the key materials being used in it. And here we've outlined the spending on aggregates across different sectors. And again, you can see the tremendous requirement this is going to place on basic commodities. Today we're talking about all these wonderful technologies, etc., but just in base goods itself, whether it's, let's take this region, sand. Sand is an absolutely critical commodity within construction, and look at how different countries within Southeast Asia have got sand, whether it's Malaysia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Indonesia, being so protective of their natural commodities, which I think can only rise in price as we move forward. On the other extreme, we've talked about transportation and the importance of the battery, and everybody's been talking about lithium, cobalt. Well, that's actually yesterday's news. The new battery is vanadium. Go take a look at what has happened to vanadium stocks in the last 12 months. Right? So whether it's older, more traditional commodities or newer materials like the cobalts, the lithiums and the vanadiums of the world, and other things which will pop up, I'm sure, I've mentioned graphite, and just a tremendous requirement on being able to fulfill that demand that we're going to see moving forward. Quick little map. I think we've seen some statistics this morning, and I think this map is actually quite interesting from a variety of perspectives. And this is the top 10 countries by infrastructure spend as a percentage of GDP. And I think what we can clearly see here is that Asia is going to be very much dominant moving forward. About 50% of that growth and that requirement is in the APAC region. So on the one hand, that says the opportunity is here. But at the same time, I actually say, well, whilst we're going to have that boom over the next 5, 10, 15, or 30 years, we shouldn't also overlook potential opportunities in the West, whether it's Europe or the US. The infrastructure in the US is crumbling, whether it's roads, bridges, water pipes. There is tremendous opportunity, even in the West, to look at spend and doing things over there. And I think we are tremendously privileged living in Asia because the majority of what we have is new. Our airports, our hospitals, our cities. The first time I took my wife to Europe, she's actually Russian and then in Singapore, we got onto the plane in Heathrow, and I see her sort of looking around, looking very disturbed. Like all good husbands, I turned around and said, "Honey, what's wrong?" She just turned around to me and said, "My God, Chris, you come from a third world country. The opportunity is here, it's just tremendous." Okay. We've talked about BRI a lot this morning, so I won't touch upon it too much, but I'd like to give an example of one country which has just gone through an absolute boom and is continuing to boom. I recently came back from Cambodia, where I've been a couple of times in the last month on some projects. And it's just amazing how this country is being transformed. China doesn't have a west coast. It needs a west coast. It's not a big fan of the Straits of Malacca, not because it isn't beautiful, like how we have Malacca, we have Penang, beautiful place. But when you talk about transporting goods through a very narrow strait, that doesn't look so good, right? So we're looking for different entry points. Burma, Cambodia, Sihanoukville, it's a deep sea port. The transformation there is absolutely amazing. The amount of Chinese money that's been poured in, now 20% of the population is actually Chinese around Sihanoukville. Again, with that brings certain potential negatives, which I think we touched upon in this morning's discussion. I'm sure we'll cover it in our discussion in more detail moving forward. Opportunity, smart cities. Everything is smart. And we talked about the technology, but I think the one word to summarize it is smart. And the opportunity for smart cities is absolutely tremendous, and smart is across a multitude of areas, of course. It's everything that we've got to take into consideration, whether it's energy, whether it's healthcare, whether it's transportation and mobility, which we believe is very much at the centre of this. And indeed, Deloitte's just set up its first future mobility centre globally. And where did we choose it? We chose Southeast Asia, and many of our future of, whether it's future of work, future of mobility, actually is being built out here in Southeast Asia and Asia, because that's where we see the opportunity on a global basis. Drivers, I think we've talked about these in detail, been very adequately covered in the discussions. Big data is the new oil. Trade wars have been adequately covered, the regulatory changes, foreign exchange risk, etc. I think the key risk is, can we properly create the ecosystems that we have? And we talk about an ASEAN, right? Is that ASEAN really cooperating properly to be able to capture all of these opportunities moving forward? So, I think the second risk is the pace of change through which we're going through, being very much driven by these entrepreneurs. Right? Can governments, can countries adopt fast enough to be able to capture these opportunities? I think the regulatory side, I think, is incredibly important. I think the governance that we've touched upon, I think, is incredibly important moving forward. And with that, I'll end my discussion and pass on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the basis of the industry and some of the challenges, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss some of the opportunities and where industries in the region can actually identify and move towards building capacity and competitiveness. Thank you. Our third speaker, I'm sure all of you are very familiar with Nurul. Nurul, let me just say a few things. Nurul Izzah is our current Member of Parliament in this new government, in this new Malaysia. Her political career began with the creation of People's Justice Party, which is the Keadilan, in 1999, when she played a pivotal role in the establishment of this new party. She's the founding member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement Caucus and a member of the Women's Caucus. She's also a committee member of the Inter-Parliamentary Union in Malaysia. Currently, she's the chairman of the Tibet Empowerment Committee, very important committee, and I think it's going to be a lot of discussion centered around technical education and where the gaps are and how, in her new portfolio, that this is going to close the gaps. She earned her master's degree from the School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University, and her bachelor's degree is in electrical and electronics engineering. So timely, the technological changes that are happening in the technical education. So without further ado, let me invite Nurul to speak about talent and how the future is going to look like.
Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Mahendran, or Prof. Dr. M. In this new Malaysia. We should utilize as many acronyms as we can. Of course, the wonderful panelists, I was really humbled to see the name of speakers today, especially Tan Dr. Lin, Chris from Deloitte. Of course, we have Prof. Anil Gupta with us, and secondly, Prof. Wu. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much to the International Federation of ASEAN and Western Pacific Contractors Association for having me here. Just now, Prof. Dr. M mentioned the term creative destruction. Schumpeter's chosen term, and I think it's very apt because you or the organization was built from the rubric or the destruction of the World War II. So looking at nation building, looking at building countries in the future is really what we make of the changes that take place. And of course, coming from a country who has just seen, I don't want to say creative destruction per se, but change, transition. I think it really opens up to a world of new possibilities, especially as we look at the external threats, domestically as well. I thought, since both speakers took a very macro look at the beginning, I want to focus more on the Malaysian experience. All of you here are experts in your own right. You from 20 countries per se. It took forever before Malaysia was chosen as a host. So I'm sure you wouldn't mind if I spend some time to at least illustrate the key ingredient that's required for a particular nation to be built, which also was mentioned by Prof. Anil just now in terms of human capital. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, I think Malaysia is a home to long-term planning. Most of you, at least my generation, just before the millennials, we were accustomed to the term Vision 2020. So even though we had quite a strong, I wouldn't say fight, but war, perhaps disagreement with Tun Mahathir Mohamad, the vision of 2020 was the one that captured my generation in terms of targets, in terms of knowing where Malaysia must and should be headed. And of course, this is also illustrated from our various Malaysia plans. From the 9th Malaysia Plan to now the 11th Malaysia Plan, you could see the involvement of the government trying to change. We had about 22 to 78% of physical projects versus non-physical projects. And this improved to 40-60, meaning 60% was allocated to non-physical projects. A keen understanding that for a country to prosper, it's not about how many great buildings you build, even though it's important, but whether those buildings end up servicing, end up bringing a level of quality of life affecting its citizens. And that's the hallmark of a living city or living nation, as some might term it. So because of this, I think, of course, looking at Malaysia, I was very excited to hear what Chris said. New buildings, our Kuala Lumpur International Airport is far newer than Heathrow. We need to increase the number of occupants and passengers, of course, but the point is, for a middle-income nation such as ours, there's much that we can achieve. Indeed, I believe it's important for us to understand some of the challenges, and I think in order to improve, you have to be humble enough to understand the key weaknesses or the key challenges that you have to first and foremost overcome. I think the mistake in many of the ASEAN values, ASEAN context, is to always trumpet our success, always having to protect ourselves from revealing too much. Well, I think a tempered view of understanding this is where we have to go, this is the human capital achievements that we have to improve on, will help us moving ahead. So the middle income trap is the key thing that has always been highlighted. I think from the change that has taken place, I'm excited to understand and to see that the opposition, the new opposition, have also highlighted the need for Malaysia, to address its weaknesses. And that's what you need in a democracy. You need all stakeholders to work properly, to work accordingly. For us, we were benchmarked with countries like Taiwan and South Korea. Prof. Wu knows this. In the late 80s, was South Korea and Taiwan is certainly not so far from where we are. But for us, I think right now we have lagged behind considerably, and Taiwan is now well known for a high technology industry over the past 2 decades, and has been identified as the 4th largest information hardware and semiconductor industries in the world. So certainly it's important to sort of benchmark ourselves. We have 20 countries, participants from all over the world, and I do hope that this story, in terms of showing Malaysia what we need to do to improve and drive forward our human capital, will help other countries to not just take opportunities presented here, because mind you, there's a world of possibilities that are presented to us, but also for us to learn from other countries. Now, it was mentioned earlier, I'm the chair now of the Technical and Vocational Educational Training, TVET. In the UK, it's termed as the professionally skilled persons. When we can rebrand it, whatever you want, but 45% of Malaysians depend on TVET. And what's more compelling, because in any assessment of the human capital, I think it's quite crucial to dive in, to be more detailed. And one of the key things I did, which was also taken part of what the previous government did, was to depend on experts to provide some understanding and depth. Today we have Deloitte, but for TVET, there were 3 reports provided for. The World Bank, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Boston Consulting Group, all on what's needed for TVET in this country. And one of the key things that's important to note is, when you look at the human capital dimension, majority of these young Malaysians involved in TVET are male. A cursory glance will make you feel, okay, that's a good thing, but the problem is the female students, female graduates in tertiary institutions far outweigh the number of male graduates, meaning young boys at the age of 15 opt out of pursuing tertiary education for many factors, for many reasons. So eventually, once they join the TVET world, they will be competing with the likes of a lot of foreign workers, and eventually a social rupture can take place because they are less qualified than their female counterparts. Penang Institute did a study and called this as the lost voice phenomenon. Numerically, the difference between female and male enrollment in the public universities, they've increased from 67,000 in 2009 to 86,000 by 2013. So you have almost 90,000 more females in all the institutions, educational universities in Malaysia compared to their male counterparts. So certainly, it gives us this opportunity. Doesn't mean if you are educated in TVET that you're not able to gain a higher degree of wage or much more skillful, but it would mean the connection to industry, the ability for different construction, the construction sector, for example, to absorb these graduates is far more important than the graduate level. And I think, of course, we have one of the key unique in Malaysian experiences. We have 7 ministries in charge of TVET. Now, having 7 ministries means you need to ensure a single authority is able to control the different institutions, more than 1,200 government institutions in this country. So I wanted to suggest, and I'm working towards making sure, if you have only one today, the Federation of ASEAN and Western Pacific Contractors, so must there be only one TVET authority that governs all the 7 ministries and their work moving forward. So one of the key issues that we are suggesting is to make sure there is a committee, a commission in Parliament to oversee TVET and industries. I've heard some of the companies here have developed their own certification. They've made sure the graduates are able to be embraced and absorbed automatically upon graduating, and this is the way to go. So Dr. M mentioned earlier that the flexibility and the ability of any country to understand that the government does not know best. It's impossible for the government to be able to control, to provide for, to solve everything. Most of the solutions today, the best solutions, are always going to be brought by a third party. So what the government, or what governments should be doing, is to provide a conducive environment where not just businesses can thrive, but also be a clear-cut, play an ombudsman role. Their credibility must be intact. They should not be crowding out businesses, but by the same token, they should be mindful of businesses that do not provide for much benefit for the country. So ladies and gentlemen, a key driver of economic growth, as Schumpeter also mentioned, is innovation. And I think it would be unfair for all of us if we don't take a closer look, and give a frank appraisal. What are the key weaknesses that's afflicting each of our countries? How can we improve so that innovation is going to be an automatic go-to effort or initiative by any particular stakeholder that engages with us? Now, I want to touch on the intellectual property and the whole mechanism and infrastructure governing in Malaysia. The Intellectual Property Corporation of Malaysia, MyIPO, they stated of all the patents issued since 1986 up to 2016, only 6.16% were granted to Malaysians. So Malaysians domestically have to do a lot more, not just to be seen as innovative, but be supported, for their efforts at trying to be creative and innovative. Only 22% of patents applied for by Malaysians are granted, whereas 93% of foreign applicants receive patent grants, and 7% were grants from Malaysian applicants. So of course, domestically we have this challenge, but I think talking big about having this focus on innovation, having these grand plans, it would not bear fruit unless you zero in the actual implementation and understand if you don't give out patents effectively, if you don't have clear-cut KPIs in every area, as the supply chain highlighted by Chris just now, how would you be able to fulfill your potential? So I think these are the key elements, whereas for us, there are in various reports, various findings, but in many countries, one of the key things that pushes their degree of success is the degree of successful implementation. So for me today, when we talk about the scene post-elections, there are many consternations, there's much consternation, there's much concern, specifically when Malaysia has been home to Keynesian economics. Government has been seen to drive economic growth. A lot of construction work and mega projects have been the usual staple approval and diet in Parliament, in Cabinet. But now, it's really important to also understand, do we continue more of the same, or do we allow for certain flexibilities in this room without hampering the market or without causing too much disruption that the local or usual players suffer in the process? So that for me is the key question, and I do believe if we manage to address the key weaknesses and move to make a simplified and clear-cut manner moving forward, especially in developing our human capital, then the lost voice will not necessarily be lost, but will be skilled, will be able to be absorbed by the different industries and earn much more than the ones who just carry a university degree without having an adequate understanding and in-depth knowledge of what the industry wants. So again, Malaysia is more than ready, and we welcome your input and your feedback, and we believe that the more frank you are, the more effective we can be. Thank you very much.